Hello, and welcome to the virtual town hall event on Heal the World, Stop the Hate. I am Plachette Robertson, CEO and founder of SAC Cultural Hub Media Company and Foundation. Thank you for joining us for this very important discussion to address increased hate crimes in communities of color and talk about solutions to reduce and stop hate crimes, along with sharing resources for victims of hate crimes. SAC Cultural Hub Media Foundation recognizes and thanks SMUD for supporting this event and also acknowledges that Stop the Hate campaign is made possible with funding from the California State Library in partnership with the California Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander American Affairs. Before we introduce our guest speakers for today, we would like to play a brief video to provide some context for our discussion.
The California State Attorney General Rob Bonta released the report Hate Crime in California 2020. Some of the big takeaways: there's been a 25% increase in hate crimes here in California over the past 10 years. The number's even higher just for last year, up 31%. More than 1,300 cases have been reported, the majority in and around the area of Los Angeles. When it comes to hate crimes involving racial bias, the number's even higher, up 67% over the past year. Asian Americans experienced the highest number year-to-year increase, but the biggest increase was against Black people, up close to 88%. That's almost double any other group, and it's the highest percentage over the past 10 years. California Attorney General Bonta says racism coming out of the Trump White House fueled the rise in hate crimes, but some Black leaders here in Oakland say this is also backlash against the Black Lives Matter movement. Anton Towers, chair of the Oakland Violence Prevention Coalition, says when Black people start to assert power through protests, that threatens those already in power.
To say Black Lives Matter, I think that's just another form of showing how we can come together in solidarity that creates, panic or fear within other races or other communities.
Now, when it comes to the LGBT community, the report finds that hate incidents against them is actually down about 12%, and some minority religious communities are also seeing a drop.
Hello, welcome back. Greetings, everyone. I forgot to remind everyone to please like and share this video, and please feel free to make any comments during our discussion. So at this time, I am so excited to announce our moderator and MC for today's town hall discussion. Kevin Ross is a Southside Chicago native, a Morehouse man, the senior minister and CEO of Unity of Sacramento, a member of Sacramento area congregations Together, and an author of numerous books. Rev Kev, as he is affectionately known, is also deeply committed to dismantling systemic racism and was arrested with 83 other community members in East Sacramento protesting injustice. He has earned a reputation as a respected bridge-building interfaith social justice activist who has shared the stage with luminaries ranging from Coretta Scott King, Reverend C.T. Vivian Marion Williamson, Deepak Chopra, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, President Nelson Mandela, and Vice President Kamala Harris. He is currently enrolled at Harvard Divinity School as a student in the Master of Religion and Public Life program, where he serves as a graduate assistant in the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. He joins us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Please welcome Kev Ross, Rev Kev, affectionately known, who will introduce our other distinguished speakers for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Plachette, and good afternoon, and to everyone who's joining us for this important Heal the World, Stop the Hate virtual town hall. We know that this issue is one that is affecting not only us who are from the Sacramento region, but it's affecting us all across the nation and throughout the world right now. And so, as we participate today, I'm asking you to be a part of the conversation, participate in the chat room with your questions and even your suggestions for how we can, as conscious citizens, take our country and our world in a direction of nonviolence and a world of peace. And this is definitely why I'm a part of this conversation. We have some great panelists who are going to be helping us to have this conversation. Betty Williams, who is the president of the Greater Sacramento NAACP, Daniel Hahn, Chief Daniel Hahn, retired and former chief of Sacramento Police, Dr. Mary Lomax Giraduzzi, Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of the Pacific, Maurice Wheatley Jr., also known as Key. He's an emerging artist, producer, label owner, and IT specialist with Classy, Classy. And we're going to have a deeper dive into their bios and their backgrounds as we move through this program. We're going to start by giving a deeper introduction of Betty Williams, who is a resident of Sacramento, California for more than 35 years. However, she was born and raised in Urbana, Illinois. Okay, so I didn't know you were from Illinois. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, so we allowed that to be a part of our backyard.
Right.
She attended college majoring in business administration with the minor in political science. She owns iSolution Business and is the president of the Greater Sacramento NAACP. She is the past executive director of the Sacramento Northern California ACLU, board of directors, Sacramento Region Women Chamber of Commerce, board commissioner for racial profiling, and currently a member of the African American Community Empowerment Council that advises the governor on the development of minority business in California. And we're happy to welcome you. It's Black History Month, and we're taking this on. Betty Williams, welcome.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
And you know, it's good to start with you because you have been on the front lines for many years, addressing issues that have negatively impacted people of color and particularly our Black community. Mm-hmm. Let's start with this question. What have you seen, or what have you observed? And we'll throw this to all of our panelists, but of late, in the rise of hate crimes. What has been your observation in the rise of hate crimes?
Well, in our NAACP office, we definitely have had probably 5 times the amount of increase of hate crimes in calls in our office and on our website. And they're nasty, and they seem to be at a different level than what I've seen in the past. And so what I see is what I'm calling the browning of America. We are browning. We are browning in California. We are browning in Sacramento. And so what that means to some people, that you're losing control, you're losing power, because the minority is now the new majority. And so that old majority is losing its footage. And so it creates fear. And fear is ignorance to me, which creates hate. And so I think when you're losing control or feel that you are losing control and or power, that's when the hate crimes have started to increase. And so that's what I've seen and I've noticed, because even if you look at our school districts, they are browning. They are increasingly more brown and black.
So just to be even more explicit, when you say the browning of America and the power base that is losing footage, are you speaking of our white-bodied, relatives who are currently holding power? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying.
And so it's posing a threat to extremists and folks who tend to be on the side of operating out of ignorance and fear.
Absolutely.
You said that you're getting phone calls, like you're getting numbers of phone. Talk to us about that, because I think people watching today would want to be equipped to be able to contact you. What is that line like? What happens that gets that information to you?
So just prior to getting on this town hall meeting, two calls came in dealing with housing and having the N word and the breakage into their home while they're gone, even though they're recorded on ring.com, having their animals hurt
Mm,
in telling them to go back home. And so
mm,
these are the things that are happening even as soon as 30 minutes ago. And so the things that we have to deal with is the local authorities, because we need to educate people that hate crime is a crime
yes.
and there are resources. And so our first line of defense is to contact the local authorities and pull everyone in. And if that doesn't work, we go on to the next line, which is Department of Justice, DOJ, and our Attorney General that
Mhm.
handles the hate crime, and start criminal charges against individuals. And we let them know that there's money in within the state of California that they can get reimbursement for any of those things that may have hurt them or harmed them or was taken away from them.
So it's really important for people to be able to call. Let's ask this question then. What's the distinction between a hate incident and a hate crime? As you know, we are now, let's say, I want to say it's 78 years, I believe it is, about
Mhm.
68 years since the lynching of Emmett Till. And we have just passed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act signed on March 29th. And he was lynched actually 67 years ago it happened.
Mhm.
Um, but there is a distinction
There
between
is.
hate incident and a hate
There
crime.
is.
Can you tell us what that is?
So an incident is just what that is. It's a person maybe calling you the N word or sending literature to your home or writing a poster and placing it there saying something negative against your race, religion, or your gender. And so under the law, they put it under freedom of speech. So it's an incident, not a crime. Now, if it's destruction of property or hurting your being, your body, or relatives, and something that's destroying. So that's a crime within itself. So a lot of times we get those calls saying, there's literature that's being thrown across my lawn saying, get out of town using the N word. And in our laws as it is, that's freedom of speech. You didn't receive physical harm or destruction of property. So that's the difference between the two.
And California does have hate crime laws
They
that are,
do.
because
Yes, they do.
that's an issue. Notice that we've just gotten it as a federal matter here,
Mhm.
67 years later. So it has to be a state by state issue as far as what is determined an incident and if it is even prosecutable as a crime.
Absolutely. And I would tell individuals to call the state office number for if you think it if you don't know for sure, you can always call the NAACP office, but the number I'm going to give you now is to the hate crime when it comes to Department of Justice or the AG's office, which is a toll-free number at 877-433-9069. And that's 877-433-9069. And you can always, when in doubt, call the NAACP local office at 916-856-0155.
This is really good. Just one quick last question, and we'll probably circle back to you as we're going along. What ground do you feel the NAACP in Sacramento has taken in addressing and successfully responding to the hate crime incidents that you've seen? Because I know you and I have been on the front lines in some of these press conference events, particularly as the rise of Asian hate in our town. What ground have you seen the Sacramento branch of the NAACP taking in this area?
So it's on a number of areas. So if we go to education, we've been working with SCOE, the Sacramento County School of Education. And so in a number of various districts where we have worked with them and implemented some rules of what to do in case of hate, and to educate not just the students but the staff. But because we are also seeing not just a rise in hate crimes when it comes to student, but our African American staff is being attacked as well. So one of the things that the local branches did, we put a resolution in that we're hoping that will turn into we're looking at I believe it's Assemblywoman Weber is looking at our resolution when it comes to having criteria for when staff is attacked through crime. Because right now the school codes only addresses students. It doesn't address Black staff. And that's something that the local branch found out. And so we're trying to get a law to implement that you need to also address Black staff. So that's one of many. And then we're looking at housing, and some of the laws that are still in the language do not rent or sell to African Americans. And so we thought all of that language was removed, but in working with the Black Realtors and with our Mayor Steinberg, we learned that it isn't. So we're working with staff to remove those languages, because if they're there, and there's individuals that are trying to implement them. And again, that increases discrimination, stereotype, and then we get our hate. And so those are some of the things that we are working with right now, but there's a number of things I could probably
and that's really important. and it's great, but it's important that that's happened. It's important that people know that this is going on, and even in that nuanced way, of getting into the kind of the language and laws that give someone the a sense of entitlement that I can act. You see,
that's right.
So language matters, word matters, and words matter. We saw in Monterey Park and in Half Moon Bay, we call those protected areas. We just saw some real serious incidents of hate take place. Betty Williams, thank you so much. I got to rush on. It's been rich. We're going to possibly circle back in a little bit. I want to take us next to our next panelist, who is no stranger to being on the front lines working for justice and protecting our community. Daniel Hahn recently retired from a distinguished career of over 34 years in law enforcement. Chief Hahn served as the city of Roseville's chief of police and their first African-American peace officer. He also served as the city of Sacramento's 45th chief of police and their first African-American police chief. As chief of police, Daniel led the department through unprecedented social unrest and the innovative evolution of public safety. Daniel is currently the dean of the Sacramento Regional Public Safety Center at America River College. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Cal State, Sacramento, and a master's of public administration from the National University. He is also an adjunct professor at California State University. He teaches a history and bias course that he developed through years of research. He's a member of numerous organizations such as the California Police Chiefs Association and volunteers his time on numerous boards throughout the region. Chief Hahn is also committed and a proud father of 2 daughters and a dedicated husband to his wife, Katrina. Chief Hahn, I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Very good. Technology is not my friend.
Huh?
Technology is not my friend.
Well, we're going to have to work on you all coming together, because you got a lot of important things to say. So take it away.
So what's the question?
What's been your observation of hate crimes? And, this, if we can get even nuanced about it, as we were reading your bio about all the unprecedented work that you did within your own department in SAC PD to address it. And as we're learning, this is not just a thing that is an externalized thing, but it's a matter of policy and structure and all of that. So what have you observed, and what can we learn from you about how to address it?
Yeah, I think at the heart of it is a fundamental issue of we've never really addressed these biases, stereotypes, racism, racial issues in our country. So I think it is increasing. I think we've seen a significant increase in anti-Asian hate crime, Black hate crime, LGBTQ. And if you know the history, you can see where these things come from. So I think a lot of people that commit either hate crimes or hate incidents, they don't even actually know the full history behind why they hate or dislike certain groups of people. They were just taught to do that. And they were taught certain things about certain groups of people. And that's why they carry out these acts. And so I think part of what we have to do is understand where this stuff came from, so people get a full understanding of where it really came from, that debunks a lot of those things. And we don't get that education. So I did research, and I'll be doing research for the rest of my life, I'm sure. And I teach courses on history for that very reason, so people can understand the origins of where some of this stuff comes for all sorts of different groups.
And you did some work within your own department on helping educate law enforcement officers. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that research, if you taught it all at the same time, it's about a 10 or 11 hour class. So I teach that to every recruit after they graduated from the academy. So it's a 10-hour course. And then the veteran officers all have to go through a week of training every year, similar to teachers and many other professions. And so in that, I taught an hour and a half, 2-hour course on, like, for example, how did our neighborhoods become what we know them as today? Del Paso Heights, Oak Park, redlining, and the racial history of our city. Because I think we're exceptionally impacted by this lack of understanding our history in California and the West Coast, because we're often taught that we're almost like the utopia of the United States, right? We're the true blending pot of the country where everybody gets along, and there's none of these things. When in reality, just about everything that the South had, we had right here in Sacramento. We had slavery in Sacramento. We had slavery in California. It's a fact, but we're not taught those things. And so people don't know that. And so we're led to believe this false sense of we don't have to worry about these things. And I think that's exceptionally harmful in California and the West Coast.
So when people, particularly law enforcement, folks coming into the law enforcement community, haven't had this kind of education, haven't had this history, then they may not be in touch with what triggers them to pull the trigger before they ask the question, before they see a human being, before they react. And so are you finding that this type of implicit bias training and this history of race training, really, which we're calling, what is the moniker for it now that's actually being used? There's a whole movement against what you're talking about. Critical race theory. Critical race theory is basically what I'm hearing you say, bringing that into the police office. How have you seen a law enforcement on your watch respond to this? Are you seeing that it's inching us forward?
Well, I think I don't just teach in law enforcement. So I think the same response comes from all, whether it's a private company, another governmental entity, or law enforcement. I think there's a lot of people that have what I would call like aha moments, where they are like, I never knew this. Why did I never know this? And then you have other people that resist it. And to me, after getting over the initial, like, how can you resist facts? You have to understand, like, this is new to them. They've been taught the opposite of this their whole life. And here comes this one person telling them something different. Of course, there's going to be some resistance. And I don't call it CRT. I just call it history, because that's what it is. It's history. It's our history. There's no one side of history, other side. It's just history for all of us. And I think we just have to understand that we all have biases. There's no exceptions. We all have biases, and oftentimes we have very similar biases, because biases come from society that we grow up into, that our brain is being fed thousands of bits of information every minute, that we're only conscious of a few of them. And so we all have similar biases. Maybe the difference between, say, somebody in a specific community than somebody else is because even though they have some of those biases, they might be less because they have contradictory information to those biases because they actually grew up in that community. So, you might think certain things about Black people, but you grew up in a Black community, so you have information that you live that is opposite of those biases. So your biases are a little less, but we all have them. So, and to think that, hearing one time the truth is going to change some of those biases, I think is a little naive. So I do think over time, the more we do this, the more you hear the facts and the truth in many different venues, the more this will get lessened. But, in a time of division and a time of where we tend to like to attack each other, and what you will see throughout history is hate groups, membership, hate itself grows in challenging times where people, it's almost like I need somebody to blame for my hardships. And so I'm going to blame X group. So if you look at the Klan and their membership, it grew at every point in time that was really hard in our country. Civil rights movement, the Great Depression, those sort of things. And so we've had some hard times over the last couple of years with COVID and some of the social justice movements and unrest throughout our cities and many other things that have happened over the last couple of years. So if you know history, it's kind of understandable that you would think, oh, some of these hateful things are going to grow because we're in hard times. And I just think the root of all of it and the place that we have to start is people have to know the facts on how we got to where we're at today. And then with that information, we can start being able to address it in a real way, because we keep going in these cycles that we keep up and down and up and down with hate crimes.
Yeah, you mentioned us living with these biases. So to put two major kind of flashpoints as it relates to law enforcement and what may not necessarily be classified as hate crimes in both instances. We recently saw the murder of Tyre Nichols, and of course we saw the George Floyd incident. And by our basic definition, we might call those hate crimes. Does the law call that a hate crime? Or are these folks operating out of some their bias, their implicit bias?
Well, I can't climb into both of their heads.
Sure.
But, to call something a hate crime, you really have to have articulable facts that you can present in court. But I think we would also be naive if we think that because the officers in Memphis were Black,
right,
and the individual they were stopping, Tyre Nichols, was Black,
right,
therefore it can't have anything to do with bias.
right,
Would be extremely naive.
correct.
Many of the biases our whole country have, the Black community has also, because we grew up in the same society. We're watching the same TV shows.
Yeah.
We're watching the same commercials and advertisements. So it's getting into our head too, to believe that certain groups of people are less than or
Correct.
different or those sort of things. So I think we would be, whether it's a hate crime or not is at times irrelevant, whether it's based on hate or bias, and whether it rises to the level of a crime or not, it's still harmful to our community.
Yes.
And it is not only harmful to individuals and communities, but it's limiting our ability to be successful as a country if we're not fully utilizing everybody's skills and abilities because of these biases or hate or racism.
Yeah. So how can somebody get in your class? How can somebody enroll in Chief Hahn's class, meet the professor, and learn this? Because this is one of the ways, obviously, you've moved forward to help stop the hate. How can they get in a class with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I'd have to think about. So I'm on like LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and just started a new social media accounts under A Way Forward, because that's what I call the course. So people can go there to look for the next offerings, and when the next time one of those will be offered. Also, I've been this whole month releasing some videos under A Way Forward and in partnership with Impact SAC on the history, the African-American history, primarily in California, but around the country, because people don't know this history. And I think it's important, again, if we're going to move forward in a positive way for all people, we have to understand the facts. And typically we don't. And I'll just use one last example. If you ask people how neighborhoods in Sacramento like Del Paso Heights and Oak Park became the way we know them today, I think most of the people answering that question would be wrong about how that came about. At least When I ask people that question, they're dead wrong. They usually make it an individual thing, right? It's about the people that live there is why that community is that way.
Of course.
But the facts are that's not why those communities are that way. It's by decisions leaders made. Those communities used to be thriving communities, used to be economic bases with vital businesses working. And the removal of those is what turned those communities into impoverished neighborhoods. And then crime and those sort of things came. And we treat neighborhoods completely different. If you think about North Natomas and the Kings, when we removed the Kings, there was a large effort on behalf of the community and elected officials and everybody to put that vitality back into Natomas so the community wouldn't be negatively impacted. But we don't have that same belief process about communities like Del Paso Heights, Oak Park, and Meadowview.
Yeah. Chief, it's been great hearing you and to just see the depth, that you view the problem with. And what I'm taking away, and I think we should all take away, is if we know better, we can do better. Thanks, Chief Hahn. Our next guest is Dr. Lomax, Dr. Mary Lomax. She joined Pacific University in 2021 as the university's inaugural Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer. She is also a professor in the Communication Department, a leader on race, leadership, and faith-informed social justice. She is guiding the university through a transformative framework designed to integrate DEI into all aspects of campus life and operations. Prior to Pacific, Dr. Lomax served as Dean of Students and Vice Provost of Diversity and Community Engagement at the University of San Francisco, where she led diversity initiatives that resulted in one of the most ethnically diverse student bodies and faculties in the nation. A 1989 graduate of Pacific, a 1989 Pacific graduate, Dr. Lomax also holds a master's in intercultural counseling and social justice education from San Diego State University and an EDD in organizational leadership from Pepperdine University. Dr. Lomax, tell me you can hear me and I can hear you.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Wow. Very impressive background. And obviously you've been prepared for this moment. Of course, we're now seeing what many would say are categorized as hate crimes rising on campuses across the nation. What's been your observation and how does your work inform how you address the issue as an educator?
Well, thank you so much for just creating this space for us to have this conversation. So I've been doing this work over the last 3 decades, 30 years in the state of California, working 18 years in the Southern California region before I came back home to Northern California. And I can tell you that this rise of what we're seeing today is really a bubbling up of some of the systemic issues that we have never dealt with within all our institutions.
Yes.
As Betty Williams has said, that these things are embedded in the legislation. They're embedded fundamentally in the laws that have guided public policy. And then public policy then oftentimes then creates the cultures that we experience at schools, where I've made my platform, which is at colleges and universities, but we also see it in the workplace, right? And let's not forget that the state of California is one of only 9 institutions, state institutions, that is, across the United States that banned affirmative action some years ago. And I remember when that happened, because I was a younger professional at the time, and we were doing the early outreach work in some schools down in Southern California, working with colleges and universities. And I'll never forget that particular fall when the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, saw this precipitous drop of Black student enrollment immediately after Proposition 209. And so these things come out of public policy, and public policy comes out of social sentiment around these ideas of merit and fairness and equality. And as Betty Williams has already said, this idea of the browning of America, the browning of California, and the latest statistics from the California Department of Education, this is the K-12 public education, says that almost 60% of the children that are enrolled in California public schools, great state of California, is 60, almost 60% of those children are Latinx children as well as adolescents. So Latino children as well as Asian American children are not that far behind it. And so we see this changing in the demographic fundamentally. And those children are going into colleges and universities, and they're also going into businesses, as both small business as well as other types of professions. And so there is an onslaught of change that is happening. And what we're seeing at institutions that I'm at is the same type of sentiment in where you have this imbalance of the students that are coming to us every year. They're getting more and more diverse. And the workplace isn't yet matched to that. Fundamentally, the professional workplace is not matched to that.
So you have a really big job as the Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and
Absolutely. And you see, this work lives at the policy level.
Yes.
It's social. What we're seeing every day playing out is these personal interactions, people saying mean things to each other, doing harmful things that oftentimes are bias incidents. And at institutions, we have a bias response team that will respond to conduct or speech or language or anything that doesn't quite rise to the level of a hate crime, so you don't go as far as moving into the criminal element, but you've created great harm in a classroom environment, or you've harmed someone in a workplace environment. And so we have these policies that we've put up to try to mitigate those things.
What about training for educators who are operating with a type of implicit bias, operating in a structure that is reproducing a type of violence that is occurring, even with the professors and the way they interact with students of color on campuses? How's the training coming along, and what resources do you need? It'd be interesting. I think the public needs to know that when these diversity officers come on these major campuses to tackle these, generations old issues, putting a black face on it is not enough. What kinds of resources do you need to help make the shifts?
Well, the first thing is that you have to hit it at the structural level.
Yes.
And fundamentally, I'm an institutional worker. So I have to work within the institution that I'm located in. And so the first thing is that you have to have a board of regents or a board of trustees or individuals who are the financial stewards of the institution. If they do not get involved in this issue, I can guarantee you that an institution cannot move forward. Until the board of directors or trustees or whatever they're called at an institution is involved in this work, you will not move the needle. You'll do what I call work around the edges. You'll do a work that oftentimes make people feel better, but you won't change the heart of the institution. You won't change the institution from the inside out. And so it must begin at the board and regents level. That's what I've done at the University of the Pacific.
So then how important is representation on those boards? Harvard University just named its first African-American female president.
Yes.
At a time when we are here reckoning with the legacy of slavery on our campus, and we are seeing a lot more representation show up. How important is representation on those boards that hold the structure together?
Well, one of the things and the priorities that my board set is that they made a commitment in their institutional efforts to increase their own board representation, because representation still matters. Diversity is not the end all and be all of this work, but however, if you have situations where you don't have the right people sitting at the right tables and they're right at a critical mass, we cannot move the needle. And so diversity is just one piece alone. And we're all celebrating Harvard and the appointment of the new president, a brilliant woman of color who is going to be leading that institution. But the next thing after that, once you get the board engaged, the board is then has to be able to use its platform for institutional policy work. And so you have to start looking at all the policies across the institution. I'm not just talking about one area.
Absolutely.
I'm talking about the people piece, the representation. I'm talking about how we go about using our audits, And how can an audit be a tool to help an institution evaluate where there are DEI dimensions, equity dimensions? If you ask the right type of question in an audit, and every department and area has to be audited, you can actually begin to unearth some things about how the culture and how that area, particularly in business and finance, has operated. And so, yes, we want to do things to ensure we have diverse supply chains and what have you. But there's other areas we have not examined. We have to look at our investment policies. We have to look at a multitude of things that go beyond representation. And representation still matters, but I like to go at the heart of the matter, where how you spend your dollars tells me about who you are. And what you believe in. And so those are things that we look at as well. But in getting back to the training, and that's the third piece of it. You have to be committed to doing wide training across the institution. And right now we're running an anti-racism challenge for 9 weeks for all the faculty, staff to engage in this what we call anti-Black racism, understanding how that is fundamentally at the center of all the isms that we're looking at and trying to deal with. So if you're interested in environmental justice, if you care about disability justice, if you understand how anti-racism is connected in those things, then you also are able to advance issues of those issues as well. And the first response from our campus community has been really great, because people are starting to understand, wow, I didn't realize that anti-racism is at the center of all these issues. And it's actually at the center of all of them.
Dr. Lomax, we have really enjoyed you. We've got to run. Thanks for showing us how to just address it from the campus to the curbside, where there's a connection between some of the things that we see out in the streets that are happening right on campus. We appreciate your contribution today. We might get a chance to come back. Let's go to our next panelist. He goes by Key. Maurice Wheatley is an emerging artist, producer, and label owner who made his professional solo recording debut in 2020 with the album Drug Dealers, Time Machines. He followed shortly thereafter with the self-produced EP Ski Mask. Those records launched a new phase of a career that began 10 years earlier when a 16-year-old Key built his own computer and started making music. Growing up, Key would fill journals with his observations on the drug and gang activity that plagued his hometown. Rather than glorify the violence around him, the young MC developed an insightful and introspective writing style. He chronicles his city's crime and subsequent legal crackdown with a sharp pen and a critical eye. He aspires to use his music and business acumen to open new opportunities for Black America, citing the inspiration of legends like Tupac, Dr. Dre, Jay-Z, Kanye West, and Pusha T. As an artist, he hopes to usher in a new era of lyricism in rap. He attended UCLA, earning his bachelor's. He also works in IT and is a program director for Classy Inc., facilitating youth mentor and college counseling, all while establishing a career in the music industry. Key, we are ready to give you the mic and the national security codes, so that because you sound like you got the future on lock. Talk to us about how this issue reaches you and touches you and inspires your work.
Yeah, so I guess also to add, I have experience as a behavioral technician as well. So I've worked with kids on the spectrum. So I do have that understanding of behavioral technician work as well. Okay. From my upbringing, born and raised in Sacramento, I've seen enough to know there's a lot of work to be done. From a wide range of spectrum. I did receive my degree in African American Studies. And Sacramento, we do have a beautiful culture. We do face those cultural challenges as well, including hate crimes, right? And we've seen the different increases. I really like the touching, I never heard of the word called browning, but that was something I was going to touch on later. And as well as Chief Hahn's understanding and breakdown and how he's implementing that throughout the police institution, right? I'll preface my viewpoints and then address any solutions. But just from an ideological standpoint, my understanding is that all hate begins with some kind of repressed emotion, with the inability to express or diffuse it. Especially without the proper tools or resources, it's hard to be a productive being or a productive member in society with those kind of repressed emotions. Hate is often misdirected, right? I read a lot, in one of my favorite books is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. He often speaks on the pain body, right? And so, think of when someone self-sabotages or for no apparent reason, and the people around them can't figure out why, or when people are lonely and they lash out and isolate themselves. That's the pain body at work.
Yeah.
Some people's pain bodies are dormant most of the time, but essentially in the extreme element, it becomes their identity. And this can come in different forms, right? From many different systems. So oppression to gang violence, conflicting worldviews to school shooters, childhood trauma to domestic abuse and relationships down the line.
Yeah.
And then I think, I don't know if it was Dr. Lomax that spoke on intersectionality, but we're looking at trauma, like complex trauma across agencies. So whether it be race, gender, sexual orientation, childhood, parenthood, we have a lot of single mothers and single fathers. There's a lot of intersectionality. And so what that means from my standpoint is, a Black woman is facing a different variety of challenges than a Black man, or, maybe a white Caucasian male. And so we look at this in different elements. Now, just to address the hate crimes, there's a with the Browning, right? That terminology, the Browning, like there's a very strong attachment to those who act on hate crimes with how things used to be. My personal belief is that some people may lose the grip of how fast the world is changing and how modern it is becoming. And we're still seeing a lot of reversals, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a fixation on dogmatic ways of existing. Mm-hmm. And some people actually push this on other people in forms of abuse, which we may call a hate crime. I do think that when we talked on like incidents, there's only so much that we can do from a structural political level. But if I'm looking at this behaviorally and from a cultural standpoint, and speaking from my own experiences, I've experienced discrimination, racial profiling, and outright racially charged disrespect. But just because I haven't had an issue with a police officer or have been criminally victimized by someone fueled by hate of my color does not mean that it's not systemic. Music for me is very socially empowering and liberating, especially when combating racism, right? The origin of hip hop specifically as a platform is to connect with those voices who have been suppressed. It sets an example, at least for me, to represent the culture as well as address the reality head on. Some of this reality may be education and prison pipeline, mass incarceration, economic apps. Chief Hahn talked on redlining. We also have mental health and substance use disorders. These different elements interact and reinforce what the hate is. It's rather than it just being these little incidents of literature, right? It kind of all interconnects. Now, just one last thing, working with Classy, it's a nonprofit organization working with youth. It's education and community based. My understanding is that we have to define the success criteria first. You could have like a loose idea on what that looks like and never achieve it. As far as, what the topic is, right? Heal the world, stop the hate. With Classy, the organization I work with, it may be leaving or developing some better systems in place that sustain quality mental health. We have virtual, in-person, hybrid models to engage with the youth. So there's that IT component in some aspect, but there's also social engineering here as well, right? Where we're focused on workforce pathways, rehabilitative resources, health resources, and education-based resources. And my last point is that we do need streamlined systems and processes in place that neutralize the environments which sustain the hate in our communities. Like I love that program that Chief Hahn has, as well as the work that NAACP is doing, and from what we've heard throughout this as well. But yeah, I think that's pretty much my point.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me how deep our people go to do this work. Not only do we educate ourselves on our own, expert areas, but also the broader topics and then integrate that into the work that we do and our passions, like in music. So quick question before we go, particularly as we're seeing hate rise across different racial categories, not just with Blacks. Now we're seeing it with rising with Latinx communities, the LGBTQIA community, the Asian community. How does music, in particular, how does music impact and influence more young people to be engaged in countering this kind of extremism and this hate? Are you seeing it bringing us together? What do you see that's happening that may be different from all these other things we talked about?
Yeah, if I'm being transparent and speaking to the culture, especially in hip hop, in terms of hip hop, I'm looking at the power of the tongue and how responsible we have to be as musicians and I guess classifying or narrating that narrative that we're living in. And so I'm looking at the impact in two different as a scale, right? So it can negatively impact and also positively impact. I mean, the current state of hip hop from a subject matter standpoint, I think isn't in alignment with, if I'm just speaking blatant, it's not in alignment with mobilization of moving forward in these elements. I don't think it naturally addresses and resists these elements of racism, hate crimes amongst all communities. But I do see the value and the potential of it being a tool. I mean, we see certain musicians do tackle this, and there's influence there. There's representation in Latino rap, and I've even seen in different.
Drop some names, because I know that we've got some young leaders who are listening, some young folks who are listening, and us ourselves who may need to get put on to some of these folks. Who should we be listening to that is bringing some, including yourself, of course, that whose messaging can help influence a more positive direction on this?
Yeah, I'd say some staples in the current viewpoint of that regard would be, if I'm being specific, right? Like Vince Staples is from LA. He talks about a lot of these different issues in his works, and it's pretty creative, but very personal, up and close, right? I mean, you'll also have someone as big as a Kendrick Lamar who is addressing mental health in his album. And that's like the overarching. So those may be for those who may not be in tune with what hip hop is. I think these people are very intentional about the message that they want to relay, as well as J. Cole, right? I think that even from his standpoint, even just not being a stereotype and choosing to kind of break the boundaries of what a rapper is supposed to look like and how he's supposed to behave and conduct himself. And then we may have like other artists as well that I've seen. But I think if you're just kind of getting started in the realm of hip hop or music from an influential standpoint, those would be the go-tos.
Really appreciate your
so much more
time. How can people contact you? I'm sure they want to know how to follow you. You are on. I think we're going to have to give you the safe codes, man. The security codes. This is the future right here. This guy is sharp. How can we connect with you?
Thank you, Rev Kev. So I am on all digital platforms, known as Key. You can find me on Apple Music, Spotify. If it's social media outreach, it's under Unlocked the Key. And so that's across all platforms, handles, as well as my content on YouTube as well. And I'll be dropping an album March 10th, which specifically addresses like a lot of these different topics.
And we can get that album on iTunes and all the platforms that day.
Yes, awesome. March 10th. It's called Reap What You Sow.
What's it called?
Reap What You Sow.
Reap What You Sow. Can you work to get it on vinyl for some of us who we're not gonna push you to 8-track, but we can get you to get it to vinyl.
Yeah, I'll make sure to have a copy for you as well, Rev Kev.
Pleasure to meet you, Key, and thanks for giving us that rich insight. Friends, it's been great being with you for this last hour and diving deeper into some practical and some deep and systemic issues that deep and systemic solutions to some of these issues that are creating harm to our communities. We've looked at ways that we can address it from a sociological perspective and connecting with our civil rights organizations like the NAACP, who are trying to change policy and also bring our community together around addressing and educating us on how we can stop hate from happening in our communities. And we had a chance to hear Chief Hahn and look at the ways in which that we have to dive deeper and understand our history. And he's saying if we know better, we can do better. So what do we need to know about our history that can help us better relate to one another? We then talked to Dr. Lomax, who really talked about the structures that inform the environments that reproduce this kind of hate at all levels. She said that representation matters, but also systemic and structural change matters. And then Key just took us to church. I mean, he just wrapped it all up in a neat bow, and he's helping us to understand that the intersectionality between all of these and how music, the right music, can be a game changer in the way our youth respond to this issue. I want to turn it back over to our host. We may have an opportunity to take some questions if there were any from the chat room, but thank you, Plachette, for allowing me to participate as moderator today. It's been rich. It's never enough time, but I hope that we were able to deliver on this topic and at least keep us engaged in thinking about ways we can stop the hate within ourselves, within the world around us. Thanks so much for letting me participate. Plachette?
At SMUD, we're committed to zero carbon by 2030. We're creating more energy from renewable resources, reconfiguring our power plants to improve air quality, electrifying our fleet, greening our buildings, and accelerating clean energy with our first grid-scale battery farm. The Clean Power City movement is happening. For 37 ways you can join the charge, visit cleanpowercity.org.
Well, all right. We just heard from one of our sponsors, SMUD. Thank you for that. So, oh my gosh, I am so full right now. Thank you, Rev Kev. Such a wonderful job. Fantastic on being our moderator for today with all of these great and wonderful speakers. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Make sure that you like this video and share this video, because there have been a lot of great nuggets of resources that have been dropped today by everyone, each one of our guest presenters. So it is our sincere hope that this town hall provided awareness and reference of resources for the California statewide Stop the Hate campaign if you didn't know about it, okay? There's a lot more information on our website. I do want to thank again to all of our sponsors, our moderator, Rev Kev, and all of our presenters. Let me just go down the name. I know that Rev Kev, he did a great wrap up, but I just loved hearing from Betty Williams, Chief Hahn, Dr. Mary Lomax. I took so many good notes. Maurice Wheatley, AKA Key. I don't think I left out anyone. So I did want to remind everyone that there will be a full article, a news article that will be a summary of today's video. But we recommend that you either rewatch this video if you haven't already, you want to refer this to someone, that people watch this video as a family. Or just, watch it at a different time at your own leisure to get all of the different resources that were dropped. It was very, very good conversation that went on during this video. And we're going to make sure that you get all of the resources that were mentioned in this video in a full article that is going to be written and posted on 2 weeks, as well as in the spring 2023 issue of the Hub magazine. So please enjoy the remainder of your day and be sure to like this video and share with your friends and family. Thanks again for joining us, folks.